Good morning, class. Today we're going to look at lesson number 15. It says 14 here. It's supposed to be lesson number 15. 14 was last class. So we're going to look again at the recent changes in Earth's climate and how this affects animals today. So I thought we'd cover a couple different locations on Earth. So we're going to look at the Amazon. We're going to look at Africa, and then we're going to look at the Himalayas mountains. So first, looking at the Amazon. So a big problem in the Amazon right now is deforestation and human expansion. But I want to focus more on the actual climate change, and we'll get to deforestation. We're going to have a big lesson on it next week. So what's happening in the Amazon is temperatures are increasing and less rainfall is occurring. And not only are the temperatures increasing, less rainfall is occurring, but the rainfall is becoming more volatile. So you get periods of extended drought, and then all of a sudden you get very heavy rains. And in the rainforest, it's known for having heavy rains, but the rains are becoming even heavier and then not lasting as long. So you get a lot more volatility in the rain, as well as the temperatures. So if we look on the graph on the left here, the y-axis shows the average temperature in degrees Celsius above the total average from 1961 to 1990. So just trying to average that, and that's going to be 0. And then we're going to see how the temperature fluctuates from there. So we can see that from when the data first started in 1950 to 2019, the temperature has increased about 1 degree Celsius, which is quite a bit for 70 years, where it hasn't increased due to any one environmental event like an asteroid or a meteor, or volcano, but just because of the emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. So on here, there's a couple points where we get El Nino years. So this is when we get unusually warm weather, but they generally don't last very long. But we're still increasing temperature over time, even though we have these spikes. And recently, there's been severe droughts that correlate with spikes in temperature. And luckily, the way the climate is working, that we get fluctuations. So we get high temperatures, low temperatures, high temperatures, low temperatures. But we're getting to the point where the temperatures are so high that every time we have a high temperature year, we're going to have a severe drought that year because we get a high temperature. So as the temperature grows more and more, we get more droughts, and they're going to become more frequent. So back in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, the temperature wasn't high enough to have these severe droughts. And even though it's a small change, what happens is you get periods in time during like summer weather where the temperature increases more than just 1 degree Celsius from what it was the year before the year or 50 years ago. And then because the climate is more volatile, the colder periods are colder as well. So this average shows a general warming, but then we get even warmer periods during our hot periods. And this increase in temperature, like I said, is not caused by any natural event. This is caused purely from humans affecting the climate, purely from what we are doing to change the climate. So when you get these severe droughts, it puts a lot of pressure on the animals that live off of the freshwater rivers in the Amazon. So we get fish populations that are not able to deal with the warm weather and inconsistent water levels. And animals that feed off this or that live around these freshwater rivers, plant life's dying off faster. The animals have less food to eat. The predators have less food to eat. It just kind of one thing affects the whole ecosystem. So not only are we seeing high temperatures and droughts, we also get rising sea levels caused by not only the polar ice caps melting, but what happens is when water heats up, it expands, and it doesn't expand very much. So it's kind of like if you leave like a pop can in the car on a really warm day, it could explode because the heat expands. The ocean is going to expand as well, but only a little bit, because we have so much of it. That little bit of expansion can have a huge difference in the water levels. So what happens is you get these low areas where these rivers connect to the ocean. And when the water levels rise, these low areas get flooded. And generally, these low areas are really nutrient rich. So there's a lot of plant life and a lot of biodiversity in these areas. But because they're getting flooded, that biodiversity can't be sustained in those areas. So either species have to move away, move somewhere else, and adapt, or if they're unable to adapt, they die off. So the water levels here are rising from about 1 millimeter to 2.5 millimeters per year, and there's predictions that it could rise to about 5 millimeters per year in the near future. And that may not seem like much. It's only like that much, half a centimeter at most per year. But over 25 years or over 1,000 years, the sea level is going to rise a lot. So in 25 years, parkland is pretty close to the water. The water level is going to rise enough that parklands could be starting to get flooded during high tides, which is not good for anybody. Well, I'm hoping that some of you will be able to get out of parkland in 25 years. Hopefully most of you have graduated by then. We'll see. So all this is going on in the Amazon without factoring deforestation. And that is one of the biggest factors. So the Amazon is getting hit hard by climate change as well as human activity. So it's really not a good time for the Amazon. But things can change as long as we kind of get our act together, which it doesn't seem like we're doing, but you never know. Okay, so moving on to Africa. So as the climate gets more volatile, we get more frequent extreme participation events from like droughts to massive rainstorms. We also get more frequent weather events, such as like massive heat waves and wildfires. There's been huge talks, I don't know, ever since I was a kid, how wildfires are increasing, and it's very true. And or even this year, crazy thing that happened this year, we had the massive wildfires happening in Australia. So wildfires are a huge issue, and we'll talk about them a bit more when we talk about the effects on humans as well, and how climate change is happening, how we are changing climate next week. So for now, we'll just look at mostly the temperature change and water levels. So in Africa, it is subject to extreme weather anyways, and with climate change, increase in temperatures, it's getting even more extreme weather. So this is affecting the animals pretty severely, and some of the animals it's affecting most, I'll touch on elephants and cheetahs, but it's affecting pretty much animals across Africa, or across the world even, but across Africa in very similar ways. So I just look at kind of two of the most extreme cases, where we look at elephants who have a very long life. So between generations, it takes a while for that generation to take over. So we see that elephants aren't great at adapting because of this, and as well because their size. They're not good at adapting to new climates. So these big droughts that are happening are affecting elephants, not only because they need a lot of fresh water, but because they're not able to adapt as quickly as other animals would be. So when elephants are struggling to find water, aren't getting enough water, not only are their lives put in danger, but in general, their reproduction rates drop. So as the climate becomes more volatile, elephant reproduction rates drop, which means the species is not growing. It's declining, which is not what we want at all. And this correlation between volatility and reproduction rates is seen across animals in Africa and across some of the other animals in the world. And again, elephants are put at most at risk because of this, because of their long generational time. So cheetahs have a similar problem. So more than the droughts, it's the warm climate that's affecting cheetahs. Because their prey population is decreasing, this causes them to have to change their diets. Cheetahs have recently started learning how to work together instead of just working on their own to catch prey, and have started taking down larger prey like emu that normally they would never be able to take down, but they started working together. So they're adapting. But their change in diet as well as the warm temperatures is affecting their reproduction ability massively. So not only do male cheetahs have lower testosterone levels, they also have a sperm count that's almost 10 times lower than what they should have. So they're actually, I think they're in the red now for endangered species, which means they're critically endangered because their reproduction rates are dropping so significantly. So in all of these cases, some animals are able to adapt, but many species are not able to adapt. And what happens is if they can't adapt properly, they're going to go extinct. So climate change is greatly endangering the great biodiversity that we have on Earth. So the massive amount of different types of animals we have is getting affected by climate change because certain groups of animals won't be able to adapt and they'll go extinct. And our climate is changing faster than it has in any other case besides natural disasters like meteorites or volcanic eruptions. So these animals are not used to having to adapt this fast. Life is not used to having to adapt this fast. Normally, when you get these massive natural events, when the temperature changes this fast, we see mass extinctions and life kind of regrows. So the goal is not to have that massive extinction. So we need to find a way to slow the change in climate down, not speed it up like we seem to be doing. Looking at the Himalayas, so the Himalayas are the largest mountain group on the world, including Mount Everest. And because of this, they're very susceptible to natural disasters and have a very fragile landscape. The animals that live there live fragile lives that can be affected by the smallest changes. So local weather stations have found that generally there's a warming trend around the Himalayas, and at higher altitudes, the warming trend is actually faster. So the higher the altitude, the faster things are warming. So it's still cold at higher altitudes, but the higher altitudes are warming faster than the lower altitudes in the Himalayas. And with many places, the rainfall is becoming more volatile, and the overall precipitation rates are decreasing. Glaciers are also receding, which means they're getting smaller, and it means every year there's going to be less and less melting runoff, which means that rivers, every summer, glaciers will melt, and then in the winter they refreeze. So in the summer they melt, and you get rivers that form from the melting glaciers. But when the glaciers are smaller, they don't have as big rivers. So this affects all the animals and plants that live off these rivers that form from the glacier melting. And what happens is as the animals get threatened, they move to higher altitudes where it's colder and they're more used to that type of temperature. And plants as well will move to higher altitudes where they're used to that temperature. But some species aren't able to adapt to living at higher altitudes with less oxygen levels or more extreme cold temperatures. So they're pushed to extinction. So I found an interesting paper that covered a lot of information about climate change in the Himalayas. It didn't talk about animals too much, but I thought if you're interested in reading like a real paper, it's there for you. And just kind of summarize the message for this lesson is that climate change is posing a major risk to biodiversity on Earth. That some animals will be able to adapt. There's no question about it. Some animals will be able to adapt, but many animals just won't. And they will go extinct if things keep changing the way they are. So the secret word today is going to be charger, like a laptop charger. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you all next time.